So we've looked at primarily the area around Florence. We've talked a little bit about Rome, but what we're going to start looking at today is some of the court cities and the larger political situation of Italy in this period. Um, as we've seen, Florence, here identified on the map as being the Republic of Florence, does change in the course of the 1500s, and the Medici are able to get complete control over Florence, and it becomes a duchy, and they become the Dukes of Florence, and then eventually the Dukes of Tuscany, the Grand Dukes of Tuscany. The Papal States we've talked about as the Pope, and we talked about it specifically under Julius II, but the Pope has a great deal of control over, a good part of central and even into northern Italy, and those are called the Papal States. Those shrink or reshape a bit during the course of the 1500s. He eventually loses control of Bologna, for example, um, which here in around 1500 there was still control of. But in any case, it's just important to know that the Papal States were an incredibly important part of the dominion of the peninsula in this period. What happens, as again we have talked about somewhat, is that in 1527 there is the sack of Rome, and for a while the Pope loses authority in the Papal States, especially in and around Rome, which was a devastating blow for papal power and for the Medici in particular, since it occurred during the time of a Medici Pope. The forces that come in and sack Rome are the forces of Charles V, who came from the Habsburg family. He is the grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella, who had sent Columbus on his voyage to discover the New World. But he was, in part because of who his grandparents were, both on the Spanish side and then on the Germanic side of his family, he had, even from birth, just an enormous amount of control over most of Europe. So Spain, areas of Germany and Austria, areas of what we would today identify as France, and into the Netherlands. And at that point, the area including Belgium. So, a very powerful force, and needless to say, he wanted to have even more control, and so tried to gain all of Italy to be under his rulership, and frankly, he does so pretty effectively, if not officially, then through a series of kind of forced alliances. Um, parts of Italy were already under the control of the Kingdom of Spain, and so thus become part of Charles V's domain, particularly Sardinia, Sicily, and Naples. And Naples at this point included much beyond just the city of Naples and really referred to pretty much the whole lower half of the boot of Italy, which is partially cut off here. So the other part that comes under Spanish control is the Duchy of Milan. And um, since they have such power localized here in Lombardy and then south through Naples, it's kind of only natural that they start creeping in from both directions to gain control of the rest of this area of Italy. They are able to take over Modena, at least to a certain extent, and that they will then become the ones that appoint whoever the governor of these areas, Parma, Mantua in particular, and who rules over them. And that allows them to really control this area of Modena and even Bologna to a certain extent. The other important area that is part of the Habsburg domain is Genoa. Technically, it is under the rulership of the Doria family, but they become important commanders in the imperial forces, and this certainly provides a great deal of monetary flow into the Republic of Genoa, and increases the power of the Doria family. And essentially, the Republic of Genoa ceases to exist, and instead it becomes a Genoa that's under the control of the Doria and, to a larger extent, of the Habsburg family. So that's kind of the political map at the moment. So, needless to say, the presence of the Habsburg control in Italy resulted in Italian artists doing a great deal of work for the Habsburg members of the family and also members of the Habsburg court. When we talk about the Habsburg court, it's kind of tricky in this period until we get to about 1556. At Until then, say from right around 1500 to 1556, there's not one single court. It kind of migrates, and the emperor travels a great deal and doesn't have one seat that's his official court. That changes in 1556 because Charles V decides at that point that he will abdicate his rulership and give control of the Netherlands and Spain to his son, who will become Philip II of Spain, and then the rest of the empire goes to Charles's brother Ferdinand. In any case, this contact with Italy, this important presence in Italy and with the Netherlands, means that a great deal of artists living in those areas work for the Habsburg court and the people that are sort of around the court. In Milan, certainly the presence of Leonardo da Vinci that we talked about at the beginning of the semester had an important impact on the way painters' styles look well into the 1500s. And here, just one example of a painting by Bernardo Luini of Salome, with the head of John the Baptist being displayed there. But you can certainly see the connections with Leonardo's style. And it sort of reminds me of what happens in the beginning of the 1600s when Caravaggio's style has such an enormous impact on those Roman artists, even long after Caravaggio wasn't around anymore to have an impact on them. The same thing is true with Leonardo and these Milanese artists. So this remains sort of the taste in Milan and becomes an important part of the collections of the Habsburgs and other sort of princely courts associated with the Habsburgs around Europe. Another painter who does well in this period, working especially for allies in Italy of the Habsburgs, is Correggio. Correggio works mostly in Mantua and Parma, which are in northern Italy and are under control of the Gonzaga, who are, really become sort of puppets of the Habsburgs. But Correggio does very well in this period, and he too is very much influenced by Leonardo. The sense of light, this interest in chiaroscuro, are all things that Correggio was influenced by. And for one of the Gonzaga rulers, Correggio did a series of the Loves of the Gods, and this, I think, is one of the most beautiful of those from that series. This is Jupiter and Io, And it's such a gorgeous painting. It currently resides in Vienna. If you get the chance to see it, you certainly should, because it's kind of a hard image to see and understand when you're not looking at it in person. But what I hope you can make out is that Correggio has kind of conceived of a new way to show this love. Jupiter sort of devised different guises so that he could be with his various beloveds without his wife Hera knowing it. And so, or Juno, whatever. So Jupiter, in this case, appears to Io in the form of a cloud. And in this cloud that you can see, surrounds and embraces actually Io, you can see, and I hope you can make it out, that there is a face that appears from this cloud formation and kisses the lips of beautiful Io. And you can see a hand appears in the cloud here as he reaches to embrace her. This is a popular subject matter, the loves of the gods, and is in fact a cycle that will be quite popular with the ruling families of Europe, as the rulers will often sort of take on Jupiter as their sort of alter ego. And we will see this with the Gonzaga residence as it was decorated for the stay of Charles V, and then also with the commissions from Philip II to Titian, who also does a similar series. Another beautiful detail. Correggio's beautiful sense of light and innovative ways of thinking about fairly traditional subject matters are seen certainly here in this gorgeous painting that is in Dresden of the Holy Night. And here you can see that Correggio has conceived of this scene where you have the shepherds who are visiting with the newly born Christ child, that it is in fact Christ who, as described in the Bible, is the light of the world, who lights up this composition. And we see the light of Christ emanating and reflecting on the faces of the Virgin Mary and this maidservant who, is practically blinded by this light and goes to shield her eyes from it. And then the adoring glances of the shepherds who are also lit by this light from the Christ child. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous painting. With Correggio, certainly you can see that there is a different style that is popular in northern Italy as opposed to what's going on in central Italy. At this point, Pontormo is absolutely contemporary with Correggio, but clearly Correggio has taken a different path in thinking about subject matter, and he's much more interested in clarity and the beauty of the figures in a greater sense of naturalism than what Pontormo and the Florentine Mannerists are doing. Ultimately, it will be Correggio who is the greatest influence on the artist of the Baroque period.